Hello there, my RPG lovers, and welcome to another video. When I first watched Game of Thrones and realized how good this show was, my RPG brain started going crazy.
Oh, intriguing.
I'm definitely not the only one that sees the amazing potential for a great RPG within the Game of Thrones setting.
I am saddened that it should be so.
Great medieval fantasy setting, amazing characters and story, dragons and so on. What would happen if the right studio with a big budget gets this IP on their hands and try to develop a big RPG? That's the question that's been on my mind ever since I first watched the show. What snapped me back to reality is the absolutely awful state of 99% of movie-based RPGs and games in general. There are always exceptions, of course, like Spider-Man and older Lord of the Rings games, which I actually covered a couple of months ago. But the majority of movie-based games are just soulless cash grabs, developed by studios that just didn't have a proper budget, time, talent, or all of those things combined. Although the publishers are also to blame in those situations as well, because it's very clear that these games are usually just forced and rushed. It's safe to say that we're never going to see a big Game of Thrones RPG, sadly.
I don't give a damn.
When I first started researching Game of Thrones games, I was surprised to find a couple of RPGs and some pretty obscure RTS games. Some of them are using the term RPG very loosely, but still, we also have a proper storytelling RPG to talk about.
Of course, if he wants it, but someone has to do it with him.
We're going to start in a chronological order and talk a little bit about all Game of Thrones games that I got to play recently.
I'm being attacked!
A Game of Thrones Genesis is a real-time strategy game which came out in late 2011. This game was developed by Cyanide Studio. And if you follow my channel, there is a chance that you watched the video I did not so long ago, where I covered all RPGs and action adventures from this studio. I also covered another RTS game from Cyanide called Confrontation, as well as Arclash Legacy. Those would be the last RTS games I played before Game of Thrones Genesis, which is kinda ironic. These days, I'm not playing a lot of RTS games since I focus a lot on RPGs, but I used to play them a lot back in the day. Game of Thrones Genesis has some pretty bad reviews, so I wasn't expecting a lot from this RTS. First of all, this game was a pain in the ass to record, so I apologize for some of the footage I'm going to use. It's one of those games that you have to restart each time you change the resolution or any graphical settings in the menu. Putting that aside, if you decide to try it out today, you shouldn't have any major technical issues. You might have some visual glitches on some maps, but it's nothing major. It seems like this game was in a very poor technical state when it came out, and that's one of the major reasons for the negative reviews. But it's not the only reason though. Let's start from the beginning.
My people are worn and tired from their journey. You may leave us.
Yes, my queen.
You can play the tutorial, which I started but I didn't complete because I got bored. I was hoping the actual campaign is more interesting, and I was not worried about learning the basic mechanics. I was right, because all levels in the first chapter are basically like a tutorial. The game starts off okay, it wasn't bad at all.
We have made a secret agreement.
The beginning is hyper-focused on learning the diplomacy mechanics. It starts off simple enough, you need to use your envoy NPCs and capture different nodes with diplomacy. Then you get introduced to more non-combat NPCs like spies, rogues and noble ladies.
My marriage will provide you with a solid alliance.
At first, all of these mechanics made sense and they seem interesting. For example, your envoy NPCs can get scared of the enemy army, so you need to hire some mercenaries to protect them. Spies can infiltrate enemy nodes and capture them slowly. They can also be used to discover double agents in your ranks. Then we have assassins who can kill spies, rogues who can start an uprising in the enemy zone, and so on. It can seem a bit overwhelming at first, but I actually think the game does a good job with introducing all of these diplomacy features. The problem is, they quickly start to overlap each other, and not in a fun way. Like I said, the diplomacy features are fine, and they make sense in a way. They're fun for a while in the beginning, but when you realize that this is what you're going to do 80% of the time, it becomes pretty boring and tedious.
We require more allies and resources if our keep is to grow into a veritable town.
Naturally, the enemy will try to do the same thing like you, so you can expect to lose the notes, then try to get them back with the same or a slightly different methods. Holding as much notes as possible is very important for getting more resources, which makes envoy NPCs the most essential in the game, basically. Some of the levels will try to break the monotony a little bit, like this one, where you need to babysit the NPC throughout the whole map. Is it fun as it sounds? Yeah. That was sarcasm, by the way.
Retreat! Retreat!
I can't think of a single game where escorting NPCs feels fun. Especially not in a freaking RTS game. That's not the worst part of the game though. When you start learning about the soldiers and fights, you realize why people didn't like this game that much. Fights in this game are extremely primitive, visually and gameplay wise. This game came out in 2011, but the fighting scenes on the field look like they came from 2006. Actually, I take that back because we had Medieval 2 Total War in 2006 and fights in that game looked way better than this. As long as you have a bigger army, you're going to win, which does make sense. But you'll gain the impression that most fights are like dice rolls and you can't do much from the gameplay side of things. There are no different strategies that you can utilize which can help you win the fight, except the nature of different units that you can deploy, because some of them are useful in different situations against different enemy, but that's about it. On top of this, the gameplay is painfully slow and there is no option to speed it up. This makes the combat encounters very underwhelming, to say the least. The story is not even worth mentioning, to be honest. It's pretty bad, considering the amazing source material. I'm not sure if you can even call it a story, since 90% of dialogue is there to justify the RTS mechanics and not to tell a proper story throughout the campaign.
I wish that you secure the support of the town which lies closest to us in the west, as well as those in the south.
Yeah, I don't know if I can recommend playing this game. Maybe if you're a huge fan of RTS games and you don't have anything else to play. In 2012 we got to see another Game of Thrones game from the same studio. Yeah, Cyanide got the rights to develop another Game of Thrones game, but it was not an RTS. This time around we got a proper storytelling RPG, which I covered on the channel in the past. Here is what I had to say about this game. The first thing that comes to your mind when you hear the name Game of Thrones, well, that could be a lot of things, but I'm pretty sure words like forgotten or obscured is the last thing you would think of. However, this game had a very quiet release back in 2012. Maybe it's because the game was developed by a not so well-known studio with almost no marketing budget. Even so, I think there should be a lot more interest for a Game of Thrones RPG. Although I need to remind you that this was in early 2012, so Game of Thrones was not exactly at its peak, but still, it was pretty popular even back then. Whatever the case might be for the underwhelming interest in this game, Cyanide Studio released a Game of Thrones RPG that nobody played.
A one-on-one will be enough to satisfy me.
I remember the first time I heard about this game from a gaming magazine I used to read back in the day. It was kinda fun collecting these things and yeah, I'm a boomer, shut the hell up. Anyway, Cyanide Studios got the rights for this IP, and they actually got George R.R. Martin himself to be a consultant on the game's script. So I guess it's not a coincidence that the only redeeming factor of this game is the story itself.
What can I do for you, handsome?
Unfortunately, even the story itself won't give you a lot of reasons to consider playing this game unless you're a huge fan of Game of Thrones IP. The lack of budget was very obvious, which heavily affected the quality of the presentation. The underwhelming presentation makes the story a lot worse than it should be.
My lot kept out of it from the start. I don't give a damn. You've been a pain in our asses for far too long.
Speaking about the story, you get to play as two different characters, Morse Westford and Alistair Sarwick. This game is divided by chapters, and at first you get to switch between these characters whenever the chapter is done. But as the story progresses, you get to control both of them at the same time. They're actually close friends. The story starts with Morse chasing down a deserter from the Night's Watch. After this cutscene, the game allows you to control Morse in a couple of different ways. Game of Thrones doesn't have a character customization because you get to play with these two well-established characters. However, you can choose different playstyles, improve their skills and stats, and acquire new gear. But the gameplay leaves a lot to be desired, to say the least. Game of Thrones plays like a CRPG with real-time pause, from the third-person perspective. What has to be my biggest gripe with the gameplay is the party members, or the lack of them. A lot of chapters only allow you to control Morse or Alistair, which makes the combat encounters extremely boring. It feels like a streamlined CRPG with very slow-paced combat. Maybe it looks similar to games such as Baldur's Gate, Neverwinter Nights or Pillars of Eternity, but it's far from that, trust me. Don't let this game fool you, this is not exactly a party-based CRPG. Well, not in a traditional way at least, you only get to control two characters at once, and even that only happens in certain chapters. There are a lot of chapters in the game where you only get to control one of these characters, which makes the combat even worse. CRPGs with real-time combat and tactical pause should strive to be just that, tactical. If you ask me, the whole appeal to that combat system is how you choose to approach different combat situations and how you build your characters in the party. They usually allow you to micromanage every move your character takes, if you desire, with an insane amount of customization for each character. Game of Thrones has some of that, but it feels very clumsy and not fun at all. Even the weapon hits feels like they lag for some reason. Some abilities can be fun to use, and you have to learn the simple rules of this combat system if you don't want to die. You have to use an appropriate weapon against different armor types, otherwise you'll deal miserable damage even on normal difficulty. Fundamentally, this is a nice little feature that could have been way more interesting if the combat itself was any better. Come to think of it, this game kinda reminds me of Witcher 1 in a way. It has a really good story, with pretty bad gameplay and mediocre presentation at best. Although Witcher 1 managed to create an amazing atmosphere, and I can't say the same about this game.
Blackbeard, that's Alistair Sarwick, one of Chataya's old lovers.
Oh, intriguing. Do you think we can...
Of course, if he wants it, but someone has to do it with him.
Actually, I take that back. This game looked very outdated even when it came out in 2012, let alone today, and the environments you're going to explore look extremely generic. Not to mention the horrible character models and low-resolution textures. Even on 4K resolution the game looks pretty bad, and I couldn't get steady 60 FPS. If you can get past those issues, you could enjoy the story for what it is, but I would only recommend this game to big Game of Thrones fans. You'll get to meet a couple of well-known faces from the TV show, by the way. If you don't care for that, avoid this game like a plague.
River Spring will soon be mine, and no one will stop me.
Game of Thrones Ascent was a 2013 browser game, and it was also on mobile platforms. Yeah, it looks like a phone game in every sense of the word. I tried really hard to get my hands to this game by finding the app file and trying to run it through Android emulation. However, it seemed like this game stored everything on the server, and the servers for the game were shut down a long time ago, so it's impossible to run it nowadays. To be honest, it doesn't seem like we're missing that much, but I heard some nice things about this game. I mean, sure, the reception for this game was not that great either, but I really wish I got to play it, at least for a while. I read a lot of comments on Reddit about this game, and a lot of people were quite positive and sad that you can't run this game nowadays. Anyway, let's move on. Reign's Game of Thrones came out in 2018 for PC, Switch and mobile devices. The first tag on Steam for this game is RPG, which got me excited. But it's also an adventure card game.
Yeah, they had us the first half, I'm not gonna lie.
My excitement levels went down quite a bit after I saw that, but I was ready to be proven wrong. Well, I wasn't, because Reigns is easily the most boring game that I got to play in recent memory. All you can do in this game is either swipe left or right. It's like Tinder basically, but no one likes you back. So it's just like Tinder. You get some objectives that you have to do, and your main goal is to survive as long as you can, as the leader of the Iron Throne. Yeah, it sounds a lot cooler than it actually is. Your choices do matter a lot though, but they hardly make any sense. You can tell that some dialogue options seem important, and all of a sudden, bam, you end up dead because of your choices. It's like a guessing game basically, and if you get it wrong, you're dead. You shouldn't worry though, because that's part of the game, and you get reborn as a new or old character if you want. You get to play as Khaleesi or Tyrion, but you can also unlock more characters from the show, and they have some minor differences it seems. I wouldn't even call this a game, to be honest. It's like a visual novel with some dialogue options. You'll get to see and talk with a lot of characters from the TV show, but all of them just mumble some gibberish. There is no actual voice acting, which would be fine if the game was fun to play, but it's not. Whatever you do, don't try to play this game unless you want something to help you sleep. Game of Thrones Winter is Coming is a free-to-play 2019 game which came out on PC and mobile devices. If you think this game looks like a pay-to-win mobile garbage, you would be wrong. It's not pay-to-win. It's pay-to-play. Yeah, this is a shameless quote-unquote strategy mobile game which has one of the worst pay-to-win mechanics that you can find in a mobile game. And you shouldn't take it from me, there are people who spent an ungodly amount of hours into this game who will tell you the same. I played it just enough to get to the part where the game tries to get your money, but I haven't spent a single dollar on it. The game tries to win you over in the first 6 or 7 chapters, but then you're going to hit that brick wall and play a waiting game if you don't want to spend any money. Everything up to that point was pretty much free, but as you might expect, you start losing currencies and resources you need to improve your buildings, your army, and so on. We all played, or at least tried a game like this before, and they all play the same. This is your regular shitty mobile game with time gating mechanics, which you can get rid of by paying real money. You know, like speeding up the process of upgrading something like buildings or soldiers. Ironically, this game has some great looking character models, which perfectly resemble their counterparts from the TV show. It also looks like an expensive mobile game in general, like it had a proper budget. It's a shame because it could have been at least a decent strategy game if it wasn't designed like a cash grab. The battle segments loosely resemble the strategy battles in RTS games. Your heroes have one special ability that you can cast every now and then, but otherwise the battles are automatic. Gee, I wonder why. It's certainly not because the developer can easily control the outcome of these battles when you have limited interaction. Now, why would they want to do that? Whatever you do, don't even bother with this one. Game of Thrones the board game came out in 2020 for PC and iOS devices. This is a strategy board game in digital format basically. Finally, after more than a couple of crappy mobile cash grabs, we got to see a pretty decent Game of Thrones game. Even though it's not the type of a game that I would usually play, I had a lot of fun while trying it out. The reviews on Steam are mostly positive at 71%, but as far as I could tell, most of the negative reviews are related to technical issues with the online modes. The reviews on GOG are similar to Steam. The Game of Thrones board game has just enough mechanics to keep the gameplay interesting and not overwhelming. To put it simply, it's a functional board game and it can be pretty fun, even for me. I went through the tutorial mode, which is actually pretty long because the game tries to teach you everything. But as always, I think it's better to learn these kinds of mechanics by trial and error. I don't know if people agree with me on this one, but I never find tutorials that useful, they just end up being boring for me. Although the tutorial in this game is like a regular game with more hand-holding, but you can still fail some tasks. Anyway, I played a couple of different challenges and I got the hang of the game in general. You get to choose a house to play with, which is not that big of a deal. The only major difference is the cards you get in the deck, which are used to increase your attack phases. The crowns and strongholds are your two main things to worry about. When you successfully manage to hold 7 strongholds, you will automatically win, and the same goes for other houses which the AI is commanding. There are a couple of different phases in the game where you get to manage your zones and troops, as well as a couple of simple diplomacy features. When the time comes to attack or defend your territories, you get to use one of the cards in your deck. These cards can usually just increase your attack power, which is the key for winning the fights. But different houses have some cards with unique effects. Once you use all of your cards from the deck, they just reshuffle and go back in your hands. The thing is, you have to try and save the strongest card for the most difficult fights. Then again, if you try to be too conservative, you can easily lose the fight as well, so it's a nice little minigame. It's not overly complex, but it has more than enough features for an enjoyable strategic gameplay. No bullshit pay-to-win mobile mechanics or anything like that. That being said, you could slap any random setting on top of this board game and it will be fine. The Game of Thrones elements are just sprinkles on the cake, so it's not exactly an immersive Game of Thrones experience that you would possibly expect from a game. Even so, this game is easy to recommend, especially to fans of board games. There are a couple of more mobile god games which are pretty similar to Winter is Coming, like Conquest for example. Conquest feels like a lighter version of Winter is Coming. I really don't have anything more to say about that game. I tried it for a while on my phone, but I quit like after 20 minutes. But hey, we have an upcoming Game of Thrones RPG to look forward to. I mean, it has RPG in the title, so it should be a good RPG, right? Oh, it's Candy Crush Game of Thrones version. Never mind.
Yeah, they had us the first half, I'm not gonna lie.
To sum it up, the first couple of games we covered are not amazing, but Cyanide at least tried to make good games. Everything else we covered, except the board game I guess, is not even worth of a Game of Thrones IP. It's really a shame because, like I said in the beginning, just imagine what would be possible with this IP if the right studio could acquire the rights for it. I guess it's too late for that now, and this is all we're going to get.
A one-on-one will be enough to satisfy me.
Anyway, tell me, did you play any of these games? Leave a comment down below. Be sure to subscribe if you enjoyed the video. You can also support me by becoming a YouTube member or a Patreon. I also have some cool t-shirts and hoodies in the theme of the channel, so check that out as well. Huge thanks to all of my current supporters, and I'll see you in the next one.